For women who have a long history of body image issues or trying to manipulate their diet and exercise to change their body, and then finding that nothing's working, and they're doing all this cardio and they're eating less and less and less over time, and they're like, why is it not nothing's changing, or it just keeps getting worse? Once you actually start seeing the changes that happen, then you want to keep doing it more and more, because lifting weights does change your body.
Mm-hmm. And favorably. Hey friends, welcome back. So in today's show with Dr. Elly and Michelle, we talk about the importance of resistance training and eating real food, particularly more red meat for women and young women in particular, because there's this unfortunate vicious cycle that often happens in young women where they go on more plant-based sort of diets, and there's nothing wrong with going on a plant-based diet necessarily. However, for young women, there's a lot of nutrients in red meat like heme iron and iron that can be very supportive of the body's biologic responses to menstruation and recovering from menstruation. So you hear from Dr. Elly Michelle, and she talks about how she transitioned from disordered eating and overexercise to actually exercising less, but more efficiently with weight training and eating more real food, particularly red meat and organ meats in her diet, and how that has improved her health. So it's a really good conversation. She helps a lot of women with fertility, with hormone dysregulation, amenorrhea, and much more. So today's show is brought to you by our sister company, Bioscience Nutrition. So one of the things we talk a lot about in this conversation is metabolic health and the importance of that. There's a nutrient, it's a B vitamin known as inositol, myo-inositol specifically, that can be very effective for supporting whole body health, and particularly it can be supportive for women. So the solution that I would consider, especially if you're having sleep issues, challenges, falling asleep, staying asleep, is Myo Relax and Calm. What's unique about this powdered tasty drink formula is it features L-theanine, taurine, GABA, inositol, and magnesium in its bioavailable form in a tasty, easy to drink, easy to mix solution that you can just have a little bit before bed, 30 to 40 minutes before bed. And it's been shown to actually, you can read some of the customer reviews over at Bioscience, see what some people are saying, how it's been supportive of their sleep and their body's relaxation response. It's just basically an alcohol-free way to unwind at night, and it can help to support those alpha waves in your brain that can get you into that relaxation state without having to rely upon psychoactive substances that can compromise your sleep. So you can use the coupon code HIH15 over at Bioscience. That's HIH15 over at Bioscience. That's MYOXCIENC.com. Check out the Myo Relax and Calm. The inositol has been shown to be supportive of female health. So let's cut to it with Dr. Elly Michelle. Thank you for coming on the show. It's great to meet you in person again. We met in person in 2018.
Yes. And
I've been following you on Instagram. And what I love about your message is it's on the same sort of wavelength as how I would like people, and I know how you like your patients to live their life. So eating good quality protein. A lot of women are scared of lifting weights. You're a big advocate for lifting weights and eating red meat and getting out in the sun, which is phenomenal.
Yes.
So you grew up in Seattle, right? A lot of people around here, especially now in the last 20 years, like there's been a big plant-based movement push. Did you ever start out like eating like a plant-based diet?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I did. Sadly. But I think it was perfect, because I wouldn't appreciate eating meat the way I do now. So I first became vegetarian when I was, I think, 14 years old. I saw a documentary, probably a PETA documentary. Wow. And shortly there, I think that was probably the first thing that I started cutting out. And then I progressively started cutting out more and more foods. And that was sort of the beginning of my eating disorder.
Interesting.
So I was vegetarian. I didn't eat any meat for 10 years.
Wow. Oh my gosh. And I want to get into your eating disorder, but what happened, like what triggered you to then start eating meat again when you were in your 20s?
Mm-hmm. So I went to medical school at Basal University in San Diego, and it was in the first year when we started learning all the basic sciences, so anatomy, physiology, biochemistry. And I started learning about, I'd already been in a low hormonal state for quite a long period of time as a consequence of a prolonged eating disorder. And, my hormones were all messed up. I wasn't having a menstrual cycle. And so I started learning about the detrimental effects on my long-term health from having low estrogen on my bone health, et cetera. So that was really a concern for me. And I started researching, okay, what can I do to prevent osteoporosis? And I'd already had, I think, 1 or 2 DEXA scans, so bone mineral density scans, showing that I had osteopenia, which is a bone loss. So I wasn't in full-blown osteoporosis, but I was osteopenic. So I was very concerned about that. Obviously, I was like 23, 24 at this time, and I didn't want to have full-blown osteoporosis when I'm 40. So I started researching, what do I need to do to try to reverse some of this damage that I've caused? And one of the main things I kept coming across was weight-bearing exercise. And I needed to have more muscle mass in order to stimulate new bone. So I began a journey of strength training and trying to put on muscle. Cool. And during that time, as I started getting stronger, I started to crave meat more.
Really?
Yeah.
Just because you're lifting weights and causing more demand.
I was starting to just build more strength. And yeah, I think I was stimulating the muscle more. And my mentor at the time, who was teaching me how to lift weights, and when I first started with her, told me, she was like, it's going to be really hard to build muscle as a vegetarian. And I was like, whatever. I'll just eat lots of sardines, because I was eating fish at this point at the time. But yeah, and so just as I continued that, I started to crave meat more and more. And I was also in cadaver lab, so I was in human dissection lab. And I saw the actual, what our muscle tissue, what the human tissue looks like. And it started to make sense to me that we need meat, because when you look at this, it's like we are literally meat. Yeah. So it made more sense to me that this is really what we need to be optimally healthy, and to actually build this tissue, to create this tissue in ourselves. We have to provide the raw building blocks for it. So there were multiple kind of things happening around this time. And and then just one day I was like, okay, I'm just going to eat the meat. And then I never went back. And then I just, over time, just, took me some time definitely to build up to eating more red meat. I didn't just start off how I am now, where I eat it almost daily, but over time, I just got more and more used to it.
More comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's hard for people to sort of make that transition, because philosophically they approach veganism or a plant-based diet for things that are bigger than themselves, maybe the environment or animal welfare and some things like that? So how did you grapple with that? Like, I guess when you saw the documentary, the PETA video or whatever that encouraged you to go vegan or plant-based in the first place, how did you mentally grapple with that? Because I think that is kind of hard for people. I've dabbled, periodically over the years, like eating more plants and animal-free products, and how'd you mentally sort of get over that?
That's a really good question. I think that there is really a way to be spiritual about eating meat and looking at just the cycle of life and appreciating, the nourishment that it provides for us. And also when you support an industry that actually has the health of the animal in mind, rather than the conventional meat industry, which is, not based in health. It's just about quantity,
volume,
and bringing in, money. And so, yeah, I think that supporting local farms and farmers that really do acknowledge that cycle of life and the nourishing qualities of meat for humans, that made it a lot more, it made me a lot more comfortable with that.
Yeah. I definitely want to get back to your eating disorder and talk about weightlifting, but one thing that I do just want to plug here, because I've raised animals, we had pigs for a while, we still have chickens, is you have to realize that eventually animals, all living beings, will die. And so I just figured out that, and realized that even if you let an animal like a pig or a cow live to however long its natural life will be, ultimately their body is going to be wasted, because the meat quality is not going to be all that good. So in a way, like you said, if the animals are being raised properly, sustainable agriculture and all of that, you're really honoring the animal's life by consuming it, and consuming every part of the animal, the bones, the organs, everything. And I think, unfortunately, that's not really sort of being utilized in commercial agriculture, in farming and industrial farming. So great point there.
Yeah. And also, I think for me, I got to a point where I recognized that it was actually causing more harm to myself to not eat it. Right. And so I was like, am I going to sacrifice my own health and my quality of life to help keep
other animals alive.
Some animals alive. I don't know if that's really the best utilization of my time here. Right. You know, I have a duty to myself, especially after, you know, with the understanding that I've already been through many years of really poor health. Mm-hmm. And so it was going to take a lot for me to actually rebuild my health. And that did require me. I got to a point where I can't continue taking care of myself this way. I'm not taking care of myself by not eating meat. And
you're not serving other people that you yourself are taking care of. So yeah, I think it's just a great thing to talk about. Now, let's get into some of those specifics if you're comfortable talking about
absolutely.
That. So maybe since we're on the topic of meat and so forth, let's talk about the challenges that you personally experienced as eating, you know, mostly plants,
mm-hmm.
And avoiding animal products. And then also, are those challenges that you experience, are those similar to what you experience with your clients and your patients that you work with that have been on plant-based diets for a while? You mentioned hormone issues and a state of just low vitality, feeling tired and all that. Physiologically, why do you think that was happening? Like, if you think about, like, is it the micronutrients? Is it the protein? Is it the animal fats? Like, now that you've sort of experienced this transition, what would you say? Or is it sort of all of the above?
I think it was definitely all of the above. It was, I mean, number one, it was complete lack of protein. So I was very thin, just, you know, kind of skin and bone. Mm-hmm. I didn't have any meat on my bones. No pun intended, but I didn't have any meat on my bones, and it wasn't healthy for my body. So there was, I think, part of, you know, I wasn't hormonally, I was non-functional. My thyroid was floored. Everything had slowed down. I think that was partly from just low energy availability to begin with. And yeah, absolutely low actual micronutrient availability, and low saturated fat, low animal fat. And so I suffered in many ways. I had, you know, digestive issues, low energy, low libido. I had a lot more anxiety, I think, like more mood issues for sure. And just, like physically, if you looked at me, I mean, if I look at pictures from myself now from that time, I don't look the same. Right. Like my hair was different. My face looked different. It's very interesting to see the difference. Yeah.
Would you have been, so if you were to put yourself in your shoes at 19 and an older woman like yourself were to talk to you back then, would you have been receptive to the idea that perhaps that way of eating was making you feel unhealthy, or were you pretty stuck in your ways? Like, I'm just trying to think about, like, how can we conversate with people? Because I do see a lot of follow plant-based folks who are visibly unhealthy looking. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder are they so sort of, do they have this confirmation bias that they would exclude novel ideas? Or would you have heard the message that perhaps, you know, or were you so stuck in it that?
Well, like I said, I was very fortunate to meet a dear friend in medical school who was about 10 years older than me. So I was 23 and she was, I think, 30. She was in her late 30s, or I guess mid 30s at the time. But anyway, she had been a trainer prior to going to medical school, so she knew a lot. Mm-hmm. And she was the one that told me it's going to be really hard to build muscle without eating meat. And she said that to me multiple times. I had to hear it multiple times before I really started to get it. And then obviously, and when I first started with her, we were doing just body weight, kind of like a rehabilitation, corrective exercise type of things, because I had no background in strength training. So she was really trying to prepare me in the best way as possible to be able to start lifting weights without injuring myself, and like developing good habits without, you know, it's so easy to pick up a bad habit if you're not called out and just keep doing that forever. And then you end up getting hurt. Right. And then it's like, what's the point of strength training if you can't even do it? Right. So I really appreciated that was so important to her. And, but then once I actually did start adding load and actually lifting weights, I was like, okay, I think I understand what she meant now, because
you're like, I'm sore. I gotta recover.
Yeah. And I was just like my appetite was increasing, and I was like, okay, am I going to just keep trying to eat a ton of vegan protein powder? Like how many plant-based protein shakes am I going to have? Or like I said before, I was already eating fish at the time. So I was eating a lot of sardines and salmon and that kind of thing. but that was getting old. I didn't want to just live off of sardines. Like, I don't know if anyone
Right.
eats sardines out there, but it gets a little boring after a while if that's all like your primary protein source.
Totally. What I worry too about the can. So the can, like they say,
Yeah.
it's BPA free.
Totally.
But does it have like a bisphenol derivative that
I
is still an
know.
endocrine disrupting chemical? But yeah,
I know. I think about that too. Anyway.
It's crazy. There's so much. So I was just
Yeah.
kind of curious, because when we are sort of stuck in our ways, being able to receive information, I just like to ask people like,
Yeah.
was there one thing? But I think ultimately what you said, and I think that's ultimately how people learn, is they have to come to the conclusion themselves and realize that, hey, my recovery isn't what it used to be. And just being brutally honest, and then having the open-minded to being open to trying different things. And so I think that's super helpful.
Yeah. And I had gotten to a point where I was already starting to realize this when I entered medical school, but I recognized that I wasn't having a period and I wanted to be this like representation of health. The career that I was going into, knowing that, okay, I'm going to school, I'm studying to become a naturopathic doctor. I want to be a model for health for people. And as a female, not having a menstrual cycle is just not okay. That's like, it's out of integrity for me to start guiding people with their health when I'm not fully healthy. I had to really come to terms with that. So I got to a place where I had to start being really open to, okay, all the things that I'm doing aren't serving me anymore because my body's clearly telling me that it's not optimally healthy. This isn't optimal health.
That's a great point. Okay, let's dive into the importance of a regular menstruation for women. And I think it's common, especially young women when they start athletics and then maybe they want to lose weight, so they're not getting their menstrual cycle. And I think there is this sort of perception that, God, I don't have to deal with this annoying thing every month.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool in the sense, but why is that very unhealthy? Like let's talk about why it's really actually a good thing to menstruate every month if you're of reproductive age.
Yeah. Well, a lot of women specifically think that a menstrual cycle is only important for fertility and getting pregnant, but the hormones involved to actually orchestrate that whole process are so protective of our long-term health. So it's really important regardless of if fertility is a concern or not. Estrogen primarily, if your menstrual cycle goes away, you're not producing enough estrogen to actually stimulate the whole process to occur. And estrogen has very protective effects on our bone health, as I referred to previously, preventing osteoporosis. And it also has protective effects on our heart, so cardiovascular health, and on the brain. So preventing dementia and cognitive decline with age. So those are, three of the biggest concerns specifically that really scared me into making some of the changes that I made, because I was like, oh man, if I keep doing this, my aging process is going to look not very good.
Right.
So I really realized that I needed to get my estrogen levels back up.
And I think it's important, not to interrupt you, but if we think about the brain and the bones specifically, these are organs and tissues that if you neglect them, and by the time symptoms present, I don't want to say it's too late, but you're getting to the point where, okay, looking for that quick fix for that pharmaceutical that's going to reverse 20 years of cognitive decline, it's not there, right? I mean, if you talk to neurologists and people that study the brain or the bones, what are you going to do when you start getting broken bones and all of these things and falling? And it's kind of crazy, not to totally transition gears too much, but Conor McGregor, did you see him break his ankle this weekend? So you're familiar with Ultimate Fighting and stuff like that. I don't follow it too much, but my brother was watching it, and he made a big kick on the femur, which is a very big bone. Yeah. And then afterwards he went to set up and he completely broke his tib fib at the ankle. Oh my gosh. It was a contactless injury. So it made me sort of think gosh, I mean, that was just a reminder. He's in his 30s, I believe. Wow. Bone health, it matters.
Oh yeah.
So
totally. Yeah. Anyway. Well, and I think about, every once in a while, if I'm on a hike or something and I slip and just smack and fall, and it's I'm good. But I'm if I was older, that could be totally enough to just totally mess
break
me up.
Something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a small little side story. I don't want to get too much into bones, but bones are really important. So we go hiking a lot, as we were talking about offline, and up at 6,000 feet, there's still a lot of snow in the Cascades. And there's have you seen these little tunnels? So on the trail, water will run down and then it'll form this sort of snow tunnel where there's water underneath because it's melting the snow, so you can break through.
Yeah.
And so we were up. This was 4th of July weekend, and my daughter, who's 9, broke through, and her shin landed right on a rock, and I thought she broke. So it was crazy. So she broke like 2 feet down, and her shin landed right, her whole body weight, right? So she thought she had broke it. It looked like a little bit bloody, and it was already starting to bruise. So we're like 6,000 feet up, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to carry my daughter down, and it's super steep. We're way out in this glacier in Monte Cristo. And so she cried and all that. And then finally she's like, I think I can walk on it, Dad. I think I can walk on it. And she could walk down. And it was like such a great time to remind her about nutrition, because I said, this is why we eat real food. You know, if you were eating Lucky Charms and having Wonder Bread sandwiches that you're envious of your friends eating at school, your leg might have been broken. And she was like, oh my gosh, yeah, sugar's bad, Dad, sugar's bad. So it was like a really good conversation, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, so bone health is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think a lot of us still, even if we're more natural minded in the way that we think, we still sort of look for the quick fix. A lot of people are like, oh, well, there must be just a nutrient I can take. Yeah, or I'll just change my diet a little bit. Like I'll cut out this food group, or, I'll start, we want to find this magical thing that's going to do that. But there's no replacement for just having good hormonal health, because our hormones do so much physiologically that we don't think about how much they're influencing just how we feel. They really make up a lot of our personality, even. That's a good point. So, and I think that as women become more hormonally healthy too, they just feel different. So that's another important thing. So aside from just the long-term protective effects, for women to have a healthy menstrual cycle, it's going to affect, a lot of women are familiar with the term PMS, premenstrual syndrome, which is where the wonderful set of symptoms that can occur in the time leading up to a period, a lot of that is really related to an imbalance of hormones. And so if we're having a healthy menstrual cycle where ovulation is occurring, we're producing progesterone, that helps to balance out the effects of estrogen so that we can feel stable and still have a good mood and not have all those symptoms that can come, which are so common.
Mm-hmm. Were your PMS symptoms more, even though you weren't sort of menstruating as frequently and so forth, were you having still PMS symptoms even?
Oh, no.
Okay, so those go away.
I was in basically a state of menopause.
That is so crazy.
Yeah.
That is so wild.
Yeah.
And then so when it started happening again, how long did it take to kind of become a normal cyclical thing?
Well, I mean, this is getting a little more into personal details, but I had times where it would sort of it would happen. I'd get one period for maybe 2 or 3 months, and then it would go away again. And then I would go another year and a half, nothing. And then maybe I would get 1, 2, maybe 3, and then it would go away again. Mm-hmm. So it didn't really start, once it came and then it just started happening consistently every month. That was at a point where I had, I had increased my meat significantly, especially red meat. Because still, when I first became a meat eater again, I was still a little cautious around red meat. I didn't really want to prepare it. I felt way more comfortable with chicken. And where I'm now the opposite. Now I'm like, chicken? I don't know.
Yeah, same.
But so that I had significantly increased that. I definitely had increased my carbohydrates as well, because being, a health conscious woman, I was susceptible to all of the there's a lot of promoting of low carbs, which is not a bad idea for a lot of people. But for some women with a history like mine, it's the opposite of what I needed. So that was a really important thing. And I think saturated fats, because that was something I was afraid of for a long time too, butter. Right. I stayed very far away from that kind of thing, and even some dairy. So I think adding in all of those foods that I had for so long thought were bad for me were actually the foods that ended up healing me.
That is so amazing.
Yeah.
And then do you find that your circadian rhythms as a whole, because it seems that there's got to be some circadian influence of menses. Do you feel like your sleep-wake cycles are better, and then all of that, like your cortisol waking response, is that all correlated? Once you get your menstrual cycle working, it seems to me, and I'm just totally speculating, but it seems that it would affect the entire circadian clock system. Did you notice anything like that, or?
It's a little bit of a chicken or the egg situation, I think, because I think that probably, honestly, a focus on my circadian rhythm probably played into what helped bring back my menstrual cycles regularly. Because prior, when I wasn't having one regularly, I know I was in medical school, I was staying up really late studying, trying to memorize things. I was also very into salsa dancing when I was throughout medical school and for a while afterwards, which is very much a nighttime activity. So I was frequently having nights where I'd be out until 1 or 2 in the morning, and then I would sleep until like 10. Right. And so my circadian rhythm wasn't great. Yeah. And then, I was already probably very chronically stressed and tired from having such a long history of under eating, and also exercising a lot, stress from medical school, all kinds of other stressors. And then so having a circadian rhythm that was off, I think was just feeding into that whole thing. So for me personally, I think that once I really started to shift that and go to bed earlier, and have more of a normal sort of having my sleep wake cycle be more aligned with nature and the environment. Yeah. Then, that was around the time that things really turned back on for me. And, but that being said, I think that for a lot of women who experience menstrual irregularities and hormonal imbalances, I think that lack of ovulation, which is required in order to produce progesterone, and progesterone has a very calming effect. So a lot of women find that once they're making progesterone, when that's being supported, they do end up sleeping better. They can stay asleep throughout the night. Their anxiety is lower. Their stress is kind of like an anti-stress hormone. So I think it can go both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about. And it's nice that it's sort of synergistic, so it'd be hard to maybe achieve one without the other, right? Yeah. So if you were only doing the nutrition stuff, but still staying up late. Now, I have this theory, because in Latin America, things don't start until 10 o'clock, yeah. But they're usually happy and outgoing. Yes. So I wonder if there's some sort of effect where you're getting so much social connection and like so much social lubrication, so to speak, because you're really watering that plant, that maybe it sort of offsets a little bit. Obviously you can't circumvent sleep disruption and all of this, but having some periodic social jet lag, as long as it's not just like Netflix and like sitting by yourself on this computer screen. If you're with other people, you're having a great time. Right. Like you feel so fired up,
It's so nourishing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. People always ask about that because, I'm a promoter of eating early and sleeping early. Yeah. But if you live in, Colombia or Santiago or whatever, like you don't go to dinner until 10 o'clock. And but you're socializing, you're having so much fun. So anyway.
And there's probably a lot of other factors over there that are different from the American lifestyle. Yeah. Yeah. So that's probably it all.
Evens itself out. Somehow. It's cool to think about, but, so I like to practice the 80-20 rule, and so,
I agree.
I would, especially after a lot of people have been cooped up due to the pandemic and all that. It's like, go out, like go socialize and stuff.
You have to have fun.
Totally.
Yeah. That's
a great point. So you said that you were in a state of essentially menopause. Do you think that this amenorrhea, let's talk about how prevalent that is in women of, like, maybe your selection bias is a little bit higher because people are coming to you based upon your story, but have you seen research in terms of the sort of prevalence of like how common that is amongst young women?
I don't have any specific statistics or data on it, but I know it's extremely common in the athletic population. So for athletic females who, highly active, exercise a lot, usually they're pretty nutrition conscious as well. So it's extremely common.
Wow.
Yeah. Or if they're not in a complete state of amenorrhea, which is they're not having any kind of period or cycle at all, they could be having a period but just not ovulating, which is also extremely common. I would say even that's probably the most common hormonal issue that I see is that women are actually having a regular period, so they think that nothing is wrong, but they're actually having what's called an anovulatory cycle. And so they're not making any progesterone. So they have all this unopposed estrogen. And so that can lead to a lot of symptoms. It can lead to a lot of other issues. It leads to a state of, a lot of people refer to it as estrogen dominance. But I think what people don't fully understand, a lot of women think if they have estrogen dominance, it means that they have all this estrogen around, which isn't necessarily the case. I've seen it where they actually have estrogen on the low side, But if it's not balanced out by progesterone because they're not ovulating, they can still have a lot of symptoms of high estrogen.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what, I've always sort of wondered that, how to differentiate. So there is more context to this estrogen dominance conversation. It's the unopposed. I like that. Unopposed estrogen.
Unopposed.
So therefore, in the relative amounts, even though the overall total pool of estrogen is lower, there's no progesterone to counterbalance.
There's no progesterone. And often another thing that will happen is what estrogen they do make, they're actually not detoxing it. So then it's staying around the system in circulation for much longer, and then that can become harmful. Wow. And a lot of times if they're already in, a low energy state, or they're highly active, or they've been restricting food and their metabolism has slowed down, then their liver slows down as well. So then their liver can't really process their estrogen. So then it really adds to the whole problem
of estrogen related cancers as well. Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, if there's excess estrogen in the tissues, it can promote, more fat storage too. So a lot of women who have issues where they're eating very little, but they're storing body fat, and they're having some menstrual, PMS symptoms, or menstrual painful periods, or menstrual issues, that can often be related to it too.
That is so common, what you just said right there. I feel like that is like the crux of like one of the more common problems that women face is they're essentially so calorie restricted, and their metabolism, their resting metabolic rate has slowed down to such a degree that
they can't detoxify.
And they can't eat anything where they'll gain weight. So they're having like Rice Crisp, Rice treats and stuff like 500 calories. Yeah. And it's like, dude, it's hard. Like that's where sort of the reverse dieting and sort of the approach that you take comes back in. And I want to talk about your mindset associated with that, because that's got to be hard to sort of gain weight to get more healthy. It's got to be a hard thing as a woman.
Yeah. It's really hard.
Let's just table that, and I want to get back to that. But first, since we're on this hormone conversation, I think it's really important. You said you were essentially at one point, and you've reversed it, but essentially in an early menopause state. Mm-hmm. Do you think that and is there any research here to support this, or maybe you found this clinically, like if you go without menstruating, amenorrhea, or what
The term what I had was called hypothalamic amenorrhea. So basically it starts in the brain. It's not really an issue with the ovaries or the female reproductive system. It's working just fine. It's just your brain is turning it off. Your brain has perceived that the environment is too stressful for reproduction, so it's going to shut down anything that's not essential. Its main concern is to just keep your vital processes running.
Anovulatory, that's what you're talking about.
Anovulatory, so that's different from hypothalamic amenorrhea.
Okay.
Hypothalamic amenorrhea is where, like I said, the brain has just shut down the reproductive system completely. So it's just sleeping, like nothing's happening. Wow. it's just not there. And an anovulatory cycle is where the woman is cycling. She's having cycles. She's having a bleed every month, but she's not ovulating. So that process of ovulation is not occurring. So the hormones are, the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis is working in a way. So it's working, but it's not working well.
It's kind of just cranking along, but at a slow pace. Okay.
Right. Yeah. And it's similar. It's still the brain is perceiving that there's a stressor. And so it's not the hormones aren't going to get high enough for ovulation to actually happen.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of parallels here with the hypothalamic amenorrhea that you just referred to. And I'm thinking of men with low testosterone, because I from the research that I found, it's not necessarily the testes or the Leydig cells themselves. It's more of maybe persistent organic pollutants or the stressors or the circadian sleep issues. So would you say that they're similar in their etiology in that sense? Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that it just depends on the woman and kind of what her unique susceptibilities are. Because it's very common that I think this is another misconception. Women will say, well, I'm having a period, so I must be fine. My hormones are fine. I'm not under eating, or I'm not over exercising, or my metabolism must not be slow, but that's not the case at all. All of those things can affect you, and you can still be having a period. It's just a matter, I happen to have been in such a severe state that everything just stopped. But a lot of women, don't get, they're still very much in a low metabolic state, and their body is in a state of stress, but they can, their body just responds in the way that it's just going to stop ovulation. Right. And so then they have all these PMS symptoms, and they feel kind of crazy and like something is not right with them, but it's confusing because they're still having a period.
Right. So they assume, well, it's not related to that.
Yeah.
It's something else.
Yeah.
I must need
Just think,
that.
oh, there's just something wrong with my hormones.
Yeah.
But your hormones are only responding to their environment. That's another thing that I get kind of fired up about. It's that people want to blame the hormones, but it's not. Your hormones are fine. They're responding completely appropriately. They're doing
how
what
nature intended them.
Yeah.
For a survival adaptation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, such a good point.
It's all about the environment.
Going back to your anxiety, because there's a lot of folks, unfortunately, who are on anti-anxiety medications. I think it's so common. I can think about parents of my daughter's friends and all this sort of stuff. Like it's super common, right? I'm sure you see this a lot. How much does this estrogen imbalance and this relative estrogen dominance and low progesterone, how much does that contribute to anxiety, would you say? Like,
I think it contributes quite significantly. Yeah. Whether they have that imbalance or whether they don't have, they're just in a low hormonal state to begin with. Our hormones really contribute to our sense of well-being.
Yeah.
And like feeling level and balanced. It makes a big difference.
Yeah. I'm with you. And so it's interesting, I think your journey is really unique because you figured out, like we always talk about root cause resolution, like you figured out the root cause, addressed it. And I wonder, and I worry about these folks who they might have the hormone issues driving their mental well-being and their outlook on life. And they're masking that with some prescription or over the counter or alcohol or wine or whatever.
Yeah.
And they're not really addressing that. Then let's talk then about fertility and then early menopause, like because there, Deanna has clients and so forth that are late 30s going through menopause, and she's 45. She's like, wow, I've never that's crazy, right? So this is happening, like So do you think that this ovulatory dysfunction can exacerbate or accelerate the process of menopause?
Well, when you say early menopause, do you mean they're actually like their FSH and LH levels have gone up, or they're just not?
They're getting hot flashes
okay.
and all of
Okay, ask me the question again.
So do you think that this hypothalamic and ovulatory issue, is that accelerating the onset of menopause in some people?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's accelerating it. I know that there are definitely issues. Dr. Carrie Jones just posted an Instagram post about this the other day, but there's, the more unopposed estrogen we have, the more issues it's associated with. So there's been associations with PCOS, there's been associations with endometriosis. So there are definitely, there's a long-term effect, but is that actually leading to early menopause? It's hard to say. My sense is that it's probably more related to environmental toxicity.
Okay, that's interesting. I would love to get into that and the gut and so forth, but let's talk about fertility.
Okay.
I think because this is so common, I don't know if you're seeing it amongst your friends, but fertility stuff, a lot of people are requiring medical interventions to become fertile. How does this weave into this conversation?
Well, like I said, our hormones are only always responding to their environment. So I think that, fertility is, to me, it's one and the same as optimal health. A person who's in optimal health is going to be fertile. And so if we're struggling with fertility issues, we have to look at, we have to go back to the foundation and really support whatever the underlying issues are that could be impacting our health. Because then the hormones are like the icing on the cake. Right. They're just going to balance out once you go deeper to the root issues. So whether it's, sometimes it is just addressing the circadian rhythm, or sometimes it's just like having more social interaction, more fun, because that helps to decrease our stress. And especially as women, we respond very quickly to those things that help to decrease stress. And with fertility, stress is huge.
Is it?
If you think about a lot of women who, they're trying to conceive and they're really stressed about it and they're trying to time everything perfectly and it's just consuming them and they're doing all these things. And then finally when they stop and they just they're like, okay, I'm going to just take a break. I'm going to just not worry about it for a while. And then they conceive. I
do hear that story a lot.
It's so common. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it is stressful, right? And then especially if maybe it doesn't work right away. Yeah. And then you're like, oh my gosh, there's something wrong. Right. And then just it ratchets up. The tension just probably climbs. Interesting. So just being more laissez-faire about it is probably a little bit better of approach, if nothing else, from an anxiety reducing standpoint.
Well, I think for women to look at all their different stressors in their life and where can they make adjustments to help to sort of buffer all of that stress or to help them cope with their stressors better. And again, I think a lot of women know that they're kind of type A, controlling, and that we don't see that we just think that, oh, that's just part of my personality. That's just who I am. It's part of their identity. But that doesn't help. That's not going to help. If the goal is fertility, we have to be willing to sort of chill more and do things that are going to actually bring us into more of a state of calm. And whether we want fertility or whether we just want more balanced hormones, I think that's really important. And a lot of us are just kind of in this like perpetual go, fight or flight, sympathetic dominant state. And so we're never going to be able to have optimal fertility or optimal hormonal balance when we're living that way. So we have to make sure, again, like you said, that like the social interaction, I think, is a huge part of that. And doing things that just help us feel calm.
It's a great point. That latter comment that you mentioned about feeling of go, I got to just check off the buckets and everything like that. Do you think women are built that way, or is it that our society sort of demands upon that? I've always kind of wondered, because a lot of the clients that I've worked with, like they're 5 minutes early, they're on time, they've done a lot of them have these same sort of characteristics. And I just wonder, is that society or is this like a nature thing? Like, was this selected for, because men are generally kind of unorganized, late and all this stuff. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, where does that come from?
I absolutely think there's a societal component to it, because it's just the culture we live in. It's very focused on achievements and, like financial success. Women are expected to be in careers and having families, and we have all these expectations. So I think there's some of it is that. And I think that women are very hard on themselves in general. I think that with the diet industry and the weight loss industry, I think a lot of us have just been taught to critique ourselves and to critique our bodies, so that we don't realize it again, but it adds a level of stress because we're constantly sort of like, our internal dialogue is quite self-critical. And so we constantly feel like we have to sort of like prove ourselves or compensate for that in our life, I think. Or we just end up being fixated on changing our body for years and years.
Yeah.
And that takes women into this cycle of that ends up messing up their metabolisms, and then their hormones are going to respond to that. Their liver and detoxification is going to respond to that, and then their mood is, all these things are going to start suffering.
Right. So it goes back to sort of where we started, is food is a big aspect of it, right? So if you're under eating, it's going to be stressful. If you're eating the wrong, macros, not enough protein, not enough fat. A lot of people, and I notice this, and I mean, I would love nothing more than to be able to grow 100% of my food and have it from plants. Right. But it's just, when I was doing that, like I had horrific, the gastrointestinal, like it just, you always feel bloated and all of that. And we know the gut, and you just hinted on it. And I would like to maybe address this further about a lot of the elimination of the things that our liver detoxifies. Ultimately, we need to excrete that in our stool. So if we're not going number 2, that's a problem. And the estrogen, the so-called enterohepatic recirculation. So why is it a problem for some people that maybe they go number 2 once or twice a week? Like when it comes to estrogen and estrogen dominance and all of this, why is that a problem?
Well, then, like I said, I mean, there's different phases that estrogen has to go through. There's 2 phases in the liver that it has to go through in order to actually go into your intestines and be excreted through stool. But then there's what's called phase 3 estrogen detoxification, which happens in the intestines when it comes into contact with bacteria. And the bacteria in your gut make if there's sort of, not healthy bacteria, they make this enzyme called beta-glucuronidase, which then causes the recirculation of estrogen, which you referred to. So there could be sort of multiple levels of this happening, where it's like, number 1, your liver isn't able to fully process it so that you can get it out. And then when it does, you can't even poop it out. And then if you're not even going to the bathroom regularly, then it's just going to continue, it's going to stay in your body. And the way I think of it and the way I explain it to patients is, if you think about the trash, when it needs to be taken out, it starts to get kind of smelly and it's not very pleasant, and it has to go out. So, if we're not eliminating regularly, that's what's happening inside of us. And then we become, it creates this toxic internal environment. So then bringing it back to fertility, if that's happening, you have to be able to, your body has to be able to clear out waste if we want to have optimal health. If we want to have optimal fertility, we want to have optimal health. Mm-hmm. So that regular elimination is so important, and making sure that your liver is actually working properly is so important. And the best way to do that is to actually support your metabolism.
So let's talk about that. What are some, we talked about weightlifting, and you noticed that, how that sort of supported your metabolism. You were just hungrier. Like you were like, man, I need to eat more. And that's what I think a lot of people are not doing. If they just do cardio, is like, you go there, you do your cardio, you're a little hungry, but then it kind of like has an appetite suppressive effect. I found that. What about you?
I think for some people it can, because it's raising stress hormones. And so it does sort of stress hormones do tend to suppress appetite, because if your body's in survival and, trying to run away from a bear, which is what's happening from a biological standpoint when our stress hormones are elevated, and that is going to suppress appetite, because you're not going to start thinking about, I'm going to go find a meal now, if you're trying to run away for life. So, but I know some people also, especially I think people who are big runners who are training for like marathons or something like that, they end up being really hungry because they're burning so much energy, but they're not actually building muscle. They're actually usually burning through their muscle. So it ends up kind of having the opposite effect of what they're hoping for. Yeah. It's
interesting. And I think there is a vicious cycle of eating disorders in the endurance athletic community, because you create, if you, like you said, if you go to the gym and maybe do the treadmill or the elliptical for 20, 40 minutes, something like that, it's easy to sort of diet and, I don't want to say starve yourself, but go into this hypocaloric state. But when you are starting to do workouts that are 2.5, 3, 4 hours, whatever, then you're eating basically your life becomes food centric. Yeah. And I noticed, like when I was doing that, doing, a lot of elite cycling and stuff, like I just always thought about food. And so you create sort of this, dysfunctional eating because you're just like food obsessed, because, you're overtraining. So it kind of goes both ways, I found with people. Anyway, so that's why I like weightlifting is cool, because, and what's nice is the progress is incremental, so you start lifting, start eating, recovering, then you get stronger, and then it becomes something that you look forward to because you're getting better.
Yes.
And so that's the thing I think is hard. Like people say, well, I just do a few kettlebell swings, 10 kettlebell, whatever. And I garden, love gardening and all that, but you don't get that incremental progress to the point where it becomes a habit,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. For me with strength training, I think it was what really was key for me was that the driver wasn't actually about my body image. Like it wasn't an aesthetic driver. It was, I'm going to become an old lady with osteoporosis by the time I'm 40 if I don't do something right now. And I just recognized how unhealthy I was. So I had this much more of an internal driver, and it was definitely coming from fear too, because I was just afraid of what might happen. And so I think it's important to, with when approaching strength training, to really look at it as I'm going to change my life for long-term health. It's not so much about aesthetics. And then especially for both men and women, but for women who have a long history of body image issues or trying to manipulate their diet and exercise to change their body, and then finding that nothing is working, and they're doing all this cardio and they're eating less and less and less over time. And they're like, why is it not nothing's changing, or it just keeps getting worse? Once you actually start seeing the changes that happen, then you want to keep doing it more and more, because lifting weights does change your body.
Mm-hmm. Totally, and favorably. Now, were you comfortable with those changes? You came to a point where you're pretty aware and enlightened, so to speak, where you're like, okay, my arms are getting bigger, my legs are getting bigger. Like, was that hard as a woman to like they're getting more muscular, like it's a healthy weight gain.
Yeah.
But there is this societal perception or this illusion that like men must like rail skinny women, so therefore I must look like that. Like I feel like there's a pull for some women towards that. And I don't know if this is biologic or societal, whatever. Was that, how did you mentally become okay with that?
That's a very interesting question. It has been such a long process for me, because when I first started, I was still at a point where I was so underweight for my body that when I started putting on muscle, like I did just look better because I had a little more mass on me, and I did start to feel better. I was getting a lot of compliments, so I was getting positive reinforcement, and I recognized that I was not in a healthy place before. So I knew that it was really what I needed to do. And that was the whole reason I sought out strength training in the first place. I saw it happening, and I knew that's why I was doing it. And, but for a long time, even then I still wasn't cycling. So something was still not right. So it did get to a point where, I had to actually put on more body fat in addition to muscle. I wanted to keep on gaining muscle, but I did have to gain more body fat as well, and start sort of just surrendering to whatever my body wanted to do, recognizing that, okay, my health, like long-term health, is the most important thing to me. So I have to sort of stop trying to micromanage what I think my body's supposed to look like, and just let it kind of take whatever shape it needs to, so that I can just be optimally healthy.
That is cool.
So there's definitely been times where it's challenging to really wrap my mind around, okay, my body is not going to look the way I, thought it was supposed to look. And I think a lot of women have this idea of what they think they should look like, or what beauty is, or what, what their body, what we're all kind of told we're supposed to look like to be beautiful. And it's tough to let go of all of those cultural expectations, or all the images that we're exposed to on social media, and really just surrender to, okay, only my body knows what is healthy for it. That's awesome. And it might not be as lean as you think you're supposed to be, but for what? I mean, it doesn't actually make you happy. Like, if you actually think, okay, if I get to that point, is my life going to be any different?
It's never enough, because there's always going to be someone who's leaner. It's never going to be enough. So yeah, I'm with you. The way to get there, though, you use the DEXA scan to have the awareness. I mean, that was part of it, right? And then going through med school, you learned so much about the body and so forth. How could you help other women who are in that state, who are struggling with, look, I know I'm healthier at whatever, 18% body fat, but I really want to be at 13% because of whatever reason. What could you have told yourself back then? Is there anything to accelerate that learning curve for some folks?
What I like to focus on now, instead of the aesthetic piece of it, is really, okay, the other signs of health, like menstrual cycle. It's a huge one. Libido, mood, energy, sleep, bowel movements, body temperature. That's another big one.
Oh, can we dive into that one a little bit? Yeah. How are you tracking that?
So for women, basal body temperature, first thing in the morning, as soon as you wake up, before you move around and get up, like you literally just get the thermometer and take your temperature. That is a huge, a really awesome, objective measure of metabolic health. So a lot of women, when they've been in a low energy state for a chronic period of time, their body temperature decreases, and that's part of when the metabolism has to compensate for low energy availability, and it's going to start slowing down non-essential processes. And a lot of people become cold, or they have cold hands and feet, cold extremities. And so to track changes, to track body temperature can be really useful. And that also is associated with the menstrual cycle too. So that's another great way to tell if ovulation is happening on a regular basis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Around menses, does the body warm up or cool down?
So the body will warm up if it has ovulated. So once the body is making progesterone, your temperature, a woman's basal body temperature should rise about half to a full degree Fahrenheit. Yeah.
That's really
cool.
So
it should be more around 97, like 97.6-ish in the first half of the cycle. And then once ovulation has occurred until the period starts again, so in the luteal phase, it should be closer to around 98 degrees or 98.6 degrees.
This is really cool.
Yeah.
So do you use an app or is it just an old school thermometer?
You can use an old school thermometer. I think, like the cheap drugstore ones work fine. You might want to do it like a few times and just take the average just to make sure. Or using something like the Daisy, which is basically a super fancy mini computer with an algorithm.
Wow.
So that's what I recommend for a lot of women who are just sort of getting used to the idea of non-hormonal forms of birth control. Right, exactly. Because a lot of you can use it without something like that, but a lot of women are so scared because they have never,
they don't trust it yet.
No, they don't trust it. They don't realize that we're actually not fertile every single day of the month. And they're so used to relying on, this other form of hormonal birth control that just shuts everything off. It shuts down ovulation, which is the whole thing that makes us fertile in the first place. So it's really empowering to actually understand, what's happening throughout the month with your hormones and to be able to track it and know that, okay, I'm actually so in tune with my body that I know these things.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So the Daisy is great to have sort of like a little bit of peace of mind that there's an algorithm behind it.
Right. And so just for people like me who don't know when women are most fertile or not, like what, in brief, when would that be like, okay, so you're done menstruating. When are you least fertile, then most fertile?
So most women ovulate on about day 14, which is the average cycle is 28 days. So day 14 is halfway through. So most women are going to ovulate, and that is actually just 24 hours. And that's when, by ovulation, I mean the mature follicle is released by the ovary into the fallopian tube. And usually if implantation occurs, it's going to happen as the follicle is moving through the fallopian tube towards the uterus. So the fertile period is usually, the fertile window is obviously those 24 hours, and then 5 days before and 5 days after, because the sperm can live inside the female body for up to 5 days. So for a woman who's really trying to be careful and proactive and avoid pregnancy, she'll want to be the most careful, basically, for there's that 10-day window. So the 5 days before ovulation and 5 days after.
Interesting.
And so you're least fertile basically on your period, which is convenient.
Kind of makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's really awesome. So I know the Daisy has been out for a few years. Is it pretty popular now? Like, are a lot of women using it?
I don't know actually how many women are using it, but I recommend it all the time, especially for women who want something to prevent pregnancy without hormones.
And would it help for fertility too? So that you're really trying during that 10-day stretch?
100%. It can be used for the opposite purpose too.
Which is good.
Yeah.
Is fertility a big part of your practice? Like, do a lot of people come to you for fertility?
I wouldn't say a lot. It's a small portion of my practice. I definitely have I have worked with some women who have had issues with conceiving when that's the goal, and some who know they want to, like, pretty soon, like in the next year, and they just want to start preparing and they want to optimize their health. That's a small percentage, but I would say probably the majority of the women that come to me, they're either dealing with, compromised metabolism from years of disordered eating, or just dieting, counting macros, competing for some kind of figure competitions and things like that. And so they're dealing with all the consequences of that, with digestive issues, hormonal issues, low libido, low energy, sleep issues, and then hormonal imbalances. So similar to what we were talking about earlier.
Right.
A lot of hormonal imbalances.
Yeah, it's so rampant.
Yeah. A lot of anxiety too, which we've already touched on. A lot of women are anxious.
It's crazy. And I know everyone's sick of hearing about COVID, but there was a new analysis, 4.8 million hospital visits. Did you see this?
No.
It came out, I think it was on the 1st or 3rd of July of this year. And anxiety was behind obesity in terms of the number one underlying conditions linked with death. And so this was a 29% increase odds of death after adjusting for age and other variables, just behind obesity. And actually diabetes with complications was less strongly linked than death and severe outcomes compared to anxiety. So you're like, this is real. Like the things that we're talking about, you're like, oh, I'm a little anxious, but that's what wine's for. It's like, well, maybe not. Like that anxiety is affecting your immune system, your ability to recover, potentially oxygenate your blood, like all of that. So
And it's also a vicious cycle or chicken or the egg thing too with anxiety. Because again, it's like, is the anxiety there because of the hormonal imbalance, or is the anxiety driving the hormonal imbalance?
Right. No, it's true. I mean, I think it's probably a little bit of both. Yeah,
absolutely. And a lot of women, again, I have work with more of a specific population, but I think a lot of women end up self-regulating or kind of dealing with that underlying anxiety by obsessing about exercise. You know, so many, I just need my cardio. It's my
Chill
antidepressants,
time.
it's like my me time. And I'm like, I don't understand how running is your me time, but okay.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of this controlling nature around food also helps women really self-regulate. And I understand that because that was me for a long time.
So being restrictive is a form of therapy in a sense? Like, is that, or?
Not a form of therapy, but there is this kind of like, it's that kind of need to, okay, you know, when everything else feels sort of out of my control or chaotic.
This is the one thing
this is something that, okay, like it kind of calms you that like, I can control, I can manipulate this.
Interesting.
Right.
Okay. I never, really looked at it that way. It's super fascinating to hear all these different perspectives, and this has been great, Elly. The cardio that you do now, is this more just you like to hike and all of that? Like, what does that look like, and how does that contrast to what you used to do?
That's a good question. I tell women this a lot. I don't actually even think about like doing cardio. I think, okay, my workout is I lift weights, I strength train. And then
how many days a week?
Currently I do 3 days a week. Because of my history with hormonal stuff, I'm like, I'm very cautious of, not wanting to increase my stress hormones too much. And I think that's something that a lot of women need to be more aware of, especially around exercise, because we don't realize like this is still a stressor on the body. And especially, I mean, I promote strength training, lifting weights all the time. I think it's wonderful. I think, almost all women should do it. And, but it's still, we have to still be careful about it, because if we're really going to try to do it as least stressful as possible, we'd be lifting light weights, but that's not where the magic happens. Yeah. We really want to do heavy stuff. So if we're going to do heavy stuff, we have to really make sure that we're taking our rest and our recovery and our sleep and just chill time just as seriously as the training. Yeah. So that's something that I've learned for me is necessary. If I want to be athletic, I have to chill to balance it out. And so I currently do 3 days a week, but I'm training pretty hard when I am. So it's not like I'm doing, if I was doing like easier workouts, I'd probably do 4. Yeah. But if I want to, lift heavier and I want to really push myself, I have to take time off to recover. Right. And then I think about the rest of the time I just play. I just do what I want. I go hike,
paddleboard, whatever, stuff like that.
Hang out outside. Yeah, I just do fun things. Before pre-COVID, I would dance, but that's not happening now because we can't touch other people's hands.
Salsa, is that whole thing done? You can't salsa dance?
In Seattle, it is definitely still kind of, it's not what it used to be. It's definitely happening again in other cities. Okay. Yeah, cities that are a little more lax.
Yeah. That's a bummer. I mean, I know a lot of people get a lot of value from that, and that's like a big social thing. So yeah, gosh, that's just another. I know. I'm sure people do it with masks on, but would that be weird?
Yeah. It doesn't make any sense, because if you're doing it with masks on, but you're you're touching people's hands. Yeah, and you're really what's the point? Yeah. It's just so weird to me.
Yeah, no, I know. There was actually a kids band. They were, I think, in junior high school, outdoors, with gloves and masks over the instruments. Have you seen these? It's like, to me, it's satirical, but they're doing blowing in a saxophone or whatever with a mask on that has a little slit for blowing into. It's like, this is what the world has come to. I mean, it's absolutely bananas.
That's
anyway,
pretty crazy.
So you can maybe salsa with a mask on. I don't know where it's all going.
Why don't they make us wear gloves then? I don't know.
It is really nice, in all seriousness, to see people socializing again and like playing, and we don't have the sort of like whistleblowers or right. Karens.
Yeah, restaurants aren't really requiring it as much.
Yeah. It's cool. I mean, it makes me happy to see other people enjoying themselves and talking and running outside and doing that. That's amazing. So let's see. We talked about. Can we get into fasting? Yeah. Because fasting's pretty popular, but again, is this a manipulation is this a way to feed into an eating disorder for some people, or is it a way to actually improve health? And I think, I get, I'm very biased because I benefited from fasting, but I do realize that it's kind of like there's a fine balance there.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not against fasting at all. I think there's absolutely a time and a place for it. I think there's plenty of people who would totally benefit from it. I in my practice, I talk a lot about, women need to actually focus on moving, lift weights, but don't obsessively exercise, move less, actually rest more and eat more. But there are a lot of people, if someone's literally sitting on the couch or they sit all day long, they don't move and they're eating, junk food and processed food and, way in excess of calories for their energy demands, they would benefit from eating less, moving more, fasting, that kind of thing. So there's plenty of people out there. But my population, I think that's usually counterproductive, especially, if fertility is a concern, if that's a goal, the body, again, has to feel like it's safe to reproduce and to conceive. And so we want to be really mindful of stressors. Intermittent fasting, especially prolonged, it's one thing if you're just doing an overnight fast. I mean, everybody should be doing that. Yeah. But extending that for too long, it's going to start to push the body into an energy deficit. And that's when the problems start to happen, especially if that's happening over a long period of time. Yeah,
that's really makes
so if a woman is utilizing that tool and she's doing a lot of longer fasting, longer than like 12 hours, even for some women, that's still a lot, especially if you've been chronically in a low energy state already. That might still be too much. You might really need to be mindful of like actually having something right before bed to help support your body, your energy levels through the night, or having something really soon, like within 30 to 60 minutes after waking up. So everything has to just be individualized, and the context is really important. And I just think for a lot of women who are already in a diet conscious, nutrition conscious, health conscious, they're athletic, that actually applying fasting is probably not going to benefit them very much.
Right. I think that's a great point. Just applying the principles of context and individualizing things based upon, the history. I mean, we approach, like if you were to get a new loan or to, invest in your 401k or whatever, like your financial advisor or anyone would always ask about your history. Like, hey, what's your income? What's your debt? What's this? What's that?
Yes.
How old are you? How young are you? When we apply or try on a new diet or way of eating, we sort of don't think about our past.
Exactly.
Like, what was our past? Like, were we metabolic? Like you said, the person on the couch who's overweight would probably benefit a lot, immensely from intermittent fasting. But the person who's already in a deficit, it's really important.
They're just going to push themselves more. If you want to use the bank account, like you're already in debt and you start fasting, you're just going to go deeper into debt. And then you've got a bigger hole to climb out of.
Yeah. It's a great point. So I always like to, because I'm sure you get the DMs. Hey, this is my body weight. This is how old I am. What should I do? It's like, okay, that would be cool. Like, I wish I could just, give you the magic solution that will customize, but I don't know much about you. But anyway, so it's just an important thing to kind of remember.
Yeah, it is so important. I mean, my initial appointments with people are 2 hours.
Wow. Good. Yes, you're getting into details in the weeds and all that, which is great.
Yeah, and for women, there's so much emotional, psychological stuff wrapped into how they take care of their body. And so for me, if I'm actually going to make a difference in someone's life and help them get results, like I actually have to go into that a little bit. Right. And for me, I like that stuff. I like kind of the emotional, psychological side of things as well. I love the physical body, but I love the mental aspect too. And they're so intertwined. So I like to spend more time with women so I can sort of understand what their beliefs are, what their patterns are, and their relationship with food, their relationship with exercise. It's all really important.
Yeah, it's very important.
And to help them become more aware of that and understand that too, because when we understand ourselves better, we can make changes much more easily.
That's such a great point. I love that. A few things. So fitness, competing, and all of that is pretty popular. And I think, like training for a marathon, training for a half marathon, doing a bodybuilding competition, whatever, if that's going to be the catalyst that inspires long lasting, make exercise a habit, I'm all for it. But I can see the downsides of that, especially for women that come from a place of potentially eating disorders or things like that. Do you want to talk about it?
I mean, I see a lot of the downsides. And it's funny because I think a lot of women, you know, if they already gravitate towards exercise and enjoying it, to do something like that, it's going to take it into a more unhealthy place. For most, I'm not speaking, there are definitely exceptions out there, but for most women, it's not like they need more motivation to exercise. And I'm like that. Like, I really enjoy it. Yeah. I have to work more on the other side of it, because I could easily just go and exercise every day, you know, a lot. But it's actually harmful to me. And I've had to learn the hard way that my body does not respond well to that. Yeah. So for me, I see one of the most common things is hormonal issues. So even if they, you know, a lot of women who go through something like that, a competition where they're training for a figure or bodybuilding competition, they will lose their period for a time. And so they will either want support with helping to get it back, or it's already come back. They've increased their calories. They've cut down a little on their training. And, but they're now having all these other like PMS issues. They're having heavy periods, painful. They feel extremely low mood. Depression's really common. As the period gets closer, the mood will just be very tanked. A lot of gut issues, bloating, constipation. So yeah, I see that a lot. And so what I really have to work on is actually getting them to still like prioritize their rest more. And a lot of them think that they have decreased their exercise. Maybe, you know, they've decreased it a little bit, but they're still exercising every single day. They're going to the gym 4, 5, 6 times per week, and they're getting like 10 to 20,000 steps per day. Like they're still very, very highly active. And while, you know, we all know activity is good for us. It's beneficial to health. So I definitely don't promote that people just lay around and do nothing. But, you know, if we're really trying to allow the body to heal, and we have hormonal issues, we do have to look at what the total stress burden is. And if we're exercising a lot, we have to consider, okay, how much is this actually contributing to my stressors? Because the more that stress level goes up, again, I'm going to keep saying this again, I probably sound like a broken record. But like I said, I had to hear things a lot of times before it really sunk in, and I was able to start making changes and really getting it. So I do tend to repeat myself a lot because people need to hear this. And it's so counter what we've been taught that we have to hear it a lot of times before it starts to really make sense.
Totally get it. No, it's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is there a way to healthily compete in fitness or bikini, do you think? Or is it like
I mean, the whole concept to me, and I'm biased because, you know, I do actually have history of an eating disorder. So for people who don't have that history, maybe there might be a way to do it. But my view is that, I mean, for something to be fully focused on aesthetic and getting to a low body fat and really kind of overriding the body's natural, you know, the body wants to eat. Right. And so if you're trying to restrict calories over time, and, you know, most people as the show gets closer, they're like, oh, I'm really struggling here. You know, like they can feel it, and their workouts are going to get harder because energy is becoming lower and lower. So all of that is really, you know, you're pushing the body's stress. You're overriding what the intuition is. You know, if you were to actually listen to the body's wisdom, you would go and eat. Or you'd probably, you know, rest a bit more. So is that really healthy? No, I don't think so. Is it, you know, for someone to have a goal like that and to be able to go through something that's challenging and then get to the other side and accomplish it, that can be really great for a lot of people. So it's really tough. I don't know if there's an answer to that. Will I ever do something like that? No, I won't.
I think it's hard for people because, you know, they keep comparing themselves now to what they used to look like, and that they're always trying to get back to that. And so that's where the people, and again, I'm not trying to discourage anyone from doing it, but I see there's a lot of throwback, so to speak, on social media of like, I remember this, or I can't wait to get back to that place. And it's always like living in the past or the future, you know? And so being comfortable with like, hey, this is how I feel my best, and realizing that, you know, I could look a little bit better if I did X, Y, and Z, which would compromise my long-term health goals. So that's just what I've seen I've never personally done a show, but I do.
Ask anyone who gets that lean how their libido is.
0. Yeah. And so libido.
If you're willing to give that up, then
good for you.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's already low to begin with, so they don't really care if it gets lost.
That's probably true too.
Could be part of it. So let's finish off on that. So when we think about libido, some people think like, oh, it's like this optional thing. Oh, that would be nice, but it is a great surrogate indicator or proxy of health. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. It's absolutely a reflection and an expression of health for both men and women.
Right. So libido should be high for people.
Yeah. I think a lot of women are used to the idea that, oh, men just have a higher libido. It's normal that, they want it more than me. And we're kind of taught that too. That's something I think we start to hear from a young age. So we just sort of take on this belief. So a lot of us are already kind of preconditioned, and then we start living, and for both men and women, libido is highly psychological too. It's, it's not purely physical, but I think women are even more so, or it's very much emotional and psychological. And so if we're stressed, if we have a lot of other things happening that are distracting us, if we're highly fixated on body image, or we're under eating, which so many women do, it's not going to be there.
And how long so we sort of talked about progesterone and estrogen. We haven't really talked so much about testosterone, but that does feed into this, right? So testosterone is very important, and you noticed it with recovery from exercise and eating more protein and calories. For women, is testosterone a big driver of libido, or is it more
I think it is a driver. Yeah. I don't think it's as big of a driver as a lot of women think, because we know that we think about, men have more testosterone, so they have higher libido. That's what a lot of us are told. So then we think, okay, we have a little bit, so we just have a little libido. But I think for women, it's more complicated than that. I think it does play a role, but I think estrogen plays a big role as well. Having the right balance of it. If it's too little, then that's going to negatively impact our libido. But I think if women actually have excess estrogen, or if it's imbalanced, I think that's also is going to play a role in it. And again, the hormones are just a piece, honestly, because I think so much of it for women is their sense of feeling confident in their body and being in tune with their body. Because if we feel disconnected, so much for women, her libido is about being connected to her body. And if that's not happening, and there's so many things in just our lifestyle and how we take care of ourselves where we're just more and more disconnected from it.
Right.
So how can that happen if we're not connected to ourselves?
That's a great point. Do women seek you out for libido issues?
Some do.
Okay. Yeah, because they inherently know, and then, or is it just a side benefit that comes with all the things?
No, some actually do seek me out for it specifically. Yeah. And it's either low libido or actually painful intercourse. So that's a whole nother thing. And that's again why I think estrogen is really important, because for women to feel, this is going to get a little bit graphic, but for women to have a libido, again, having proper lubrication is really important, and estrogen is responsible for that.
Right. And so if you're not getting that lubrication from the estrogen, it's going to be painful, it's going to be discomforting.
Exactly.
And then that can cause relationship issues too, because it's like, she doesn't want to have it, he does, and then all this sort of stuff. So it comes down.
And then women feel this sense of guilt or shame, like there's something wrong with me, but my body is broken. And the whole thing just becomes very stressful, mechanical, and they're applying creams and things like that. And my approach is still always going to be, okay, we have to address the actual hormones, what's causing the hormones to be imbalanced. It's always going to go back to lifestyle, environment, nutrition, exercise, over-exercise, and really addressing the deeper emotional piece of how she relates to herself. And then there's all kinds of relationship factors too, because there's so many, like the woman's body is going to be responding to dynamics that are, the underlying dynamics or issues in the relationship. So I think with relationships, if there's things that are kind of like under the surface that aren't being talked about, or there's like hidden resentments, or there's all kinds of things that can sort of build tension over time. And in the moment, it might just feel like, oh, I'm just not in the mood, but you're emotionally responding to all that stuff. Yeah. There's a couple who I follow who are very big on talking about those kinds of dynamics and relationships, and they refer to it as building bricks. Like each time something happens in a relationship, like you put it, that doesn't get talked about or communicated, brick goes down, and then it happens again, another brick, and then slowly you have this whole brick wall, and in the bedroom, it's like you've got a brick wall between you and the bedroom. So for both men and women are going to respond to that, but I think because women were so, our libido is so intertwined with emotions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It makes it's really important, and a lot of people are sort of, they don't really want to go into that. So.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, and you mentioned pain with intercourse. How much? So we talked about sort of the biologic there, but if someone's been abused sexually and things like that, which unfortunately is way more common than people want to recognize and acknowledge.
Yes.
How like if you were to weight, it's equally distributed between hormone imbalances driving that painful intercourse versus abuse. How much more prevalent is one versus the other, or?
I don't know if I have a good answer to that, because I feel like in my experience, a lot of the women that I work with specifically for libido issues or painful intercourse actually haven't reported to me that they have history of sexual trauma. I definitely have worked with women who have history of sexual trauma, or who actually history of abortion as well can definitely play into it, because it sort of like, for women, again, like we are so emotionally connected. And so a lot of emotions end up sort of getting stored in that region of the body. And so that can, play out in different ways. But I haven't actually seen those kinds of sexual traumas in the history play out in terms of affecting the libido.
Okay.
So yeah, I haven't seen that. I'm sure, I know that it does happen.
Right.
Yeah.
It's scary. When you read the stats, right? It's like 1 in 4 women, or is it higher? Or that's about it. It's like 25%.
I don't know.
It's crazy. I mean, these stats were kind of circulating a lot, like last summer, when there was Jeffrey Epstein and all this sort of thing going on, and it was like surprising how little it's sort of talked about. Yeah. So it's scary. As a father with a daughter, I'm like always like, you're on alert, right? Because you don't want your kid to be one of those stats. So it's crazy. Elly, I'm sure we could go on and on about all these different issues. It's been great to really take a deep dive and sort of, talk about how you've changed your lifestyle and it's changed your body and how you approach the world and how you show up in the world. It's really, really cool. For people that want to connect with you, what's the best place for that?
You can check me out on Instagram, drellymichelle.com, dr.ellymichelle.com, or my website, Instagram at dr.ellymichelle, or my website, drellymichelle.com.
Nice. And you see people all throughout the world?
Throughout the U.S.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I have a couple people in Australia.
Right on.
But
Yeah, that's great. Now, are you doing in-person stuff, or is it all virtual at this point?
I'm doing all virtual.
That's cool. How do you like that? Because you were doing it in person before COVID.
No,
right?
I actually never did it in person.
Wow.
I was virtual before COVID.
Nice.
Yeah.
What inspired you to do that?
I wanted freedom. I didn't want to be tied down. I wanted to be able to travel and not be tied down to a location.
So if someone needs like IV therapy, or like I'm working with someone who is really, really anemic. She had gastric bypass, and so I'm recommending to her like IV iron, like just to get it going. Have you found, have you found that to be, you have to work within your network of like referring?
Yeah. There's definitely cons to it. I choose to have the pros of being location independent and being able to just work from home, but there's things that I miss sometimes. Sometimes if there's something more acute happening and I'm like, I can't do a physical exam, or, and there's aspects about being actually like part of a practice and having, colleagues and people, having the access to IV therapy and access to actual, having like a phlebotomist or something on site, like that would be great. But yeah, we make do. And because it really depends on where people are. I tend to have more connections in California because I lived there for a while. But if, I have a couple people that I can think of that I, recommended IV therapy. And so then I'll just sort of help them find something. I'll do a little searching, see if I can find something that looks reputable in their area. But they usually can find things as well.
Yeah, too. It's pretty easy now with the right keywords and stuff like that. And most major cities now have great clinics, naturopathic clinics that people can refer.
Yeah, and there's mobile phlebotomists everywhere.
Yeah.
So usually coordinating blood draws is pretty straightforward.
Right. I wanted to ask you, have you tested your antibodies? Because you had COVID. When was that?
October.
Okay.
Yeah, mid-October.
And how was it for you?
Very mild. Yeah, it was very mild. I've said before, I would almost rather have that than a cold.
Yeah. So you had like muscle aches or?
Nope. I just had fatigue.
Really?
I was just tired. I just slept for like 10 hours every night for a week. And then I lost my sense of smell and taste at the very end, which was annoying.
Isn't that weird how it's delayed? It's so bizarre. Like
it was like about a week. And then I was like, oh, my energy's coming back. But then I started not being able to taste food.
Yeah. And how is that now? Like how long did that take to resolve?
It only took a few days, honestly. I think I couldn't really taste for 3 or 4 days. And then it started to come back.
Yeah. Yeah. That to me is so fascinating, how it's delayed and then it comes back. Like my sense of smell is still muted a little bit.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it's not like I can still smell like caustic things, but like when I'm out in nature, there was this like cedar or spruce, like you could just smell like you're on a hike. And that to me, I'm like, I kind of don't smell that quite yet.
Interesting.
So it's very subtle.
I feel like I've noticed that. Yeah.
Anyway, it's
I know
interesting.
it is very weird though.
It's crazy.
It was definitely unlike any other sickness that I've had.
Right.
But it was still, I didn't have any cough. I didn't have any
shortness
fever, no shortness of breath, no muscle or body aches.
Crazy. So have you tested your antibodies?
I haven't.
Okay.
I should. I need to do that.
It'll be interesting. I just got a friend that texted me, another naturopathic doctor. Her husband got it with her and he was more severely sick than she was. He's 52, I think, and his antibodies are still in the 600s. So now they quantify them, and that's like way high. Mine, I think, were like 400 and something. I can't remember. Hers were only 8.
I'll have to find out where you did it so I can go and do it.
Yeah, LabCorp does it now, which is cool.
Okay.
Yeah. Total quantitative, and then you can also get the nucleocapsid antibody, which is cool too. Anyway, I think I'm going to retest mine tomorrow because it will be about 7 months. So I'm just kind of curious.
I know everyone's saying that they don't last. When you say, oh, I had it, so I had the antibodies, people will be like,
oh, sure.
Oh, but it doesn't work like other viruses, that the immunity doesn't last.
Like we talked about people that are sitting on the couch, not exercising. I would be surprised if they lasted in that population, but people like you and I who are intentional about our health, the immune system knows what to do. It has memory. Elly, thanks again for coming on. Keep up the great work.
Thank you so much for having me.